At my current D&D table, I have 7 players, which is already pretty intense on its own, but I do really appreciate that having this amount of players means that I have quite a variety of gameplay styles. You know, I've got the RPers, people who are just there to flirt with each other. I got a few, jokesters, and then I've got some of the most downright upsetting power gamers you can possibly imagine. This adds a healthy amount of variety to the game, especially with how the players interact with the, day-to-day environment around them. But, as you can imagine, it does make combat kind of a nightmare to design around. So how do I even, hurt the player that, is power gaming out of their mind? And then how do I not make that same villain just implode the player who doesn't really even know what their stats do? Honestly, I don't really know the solution to this. I kind of just wanted to spill out my feelings, which is kind of how I've been treating a lot of these videos. I do have some solutions, but my solutions are more vibes based. What I mean by that is it's kind of more important that the enemy feels dangerous rather than the stat block itself being extremely powerful. Because if it feels dangerous, at least people will feel like they're being challenged. I often have to readjust my entire way of doing combat anyways, just on the fly, because I have a warlock player or a paladin player just absolutely ruining my villain's days. Before I get into this, just take whatever I say with a grain of salt. Of course, my games are my games and your games are your games. What works for me might not work for you, but I am just offering other perspectives for the most part. And then also when I am saying villain, I am speaking about villains or, antagonists that fight on the same scale as the players. So nothing like a giant beast, like kaiju, something like that. I think if you're planning on fighting something that's kaiju scaled, at that point, just get Ryoku's Guide to the Yokai Realms by D&D Shorts. His kaiju rules in there are really fun, and I really like those. Just use those. Kaiju should work on a completely different scale than, or different rule set than regular, enemies. So I'm being very careful when I'm talking about villains. It should be someone that you can very reasonably walk up to and just hit with your fist. Someone you can punch in the jaw, So, I love referencing World of Warcraft because even though I've been clean for a few years. So when we're thinking villains, we're thinking the Lich King, okay? And not Deathwing. Deathwing is a giant dragon. He should have different rules. Got it? Cool. So I'm just going to go through about 4 of the things that I like to add to combat. There are a few more things, but I think these things are fairly impactful and they are important. And they make fights just feel a little bit more dangerous. Number 1, villains don't fight alone normally. Nothing is more unsatisfying than having this cool villain stat block and then having your, a large group of adventurers, 5, 7 plus, with their band of NPCs they've collected along the way, just absolutely dogpiling your enemy. No matter how strong that stat block is, it can very easily be overwhelmed just by being surrounded. Villains are usually surrounded by powerful lieutenants and followers, so use them. And when I say use them, I can kind of imagine 2 primary ways in which you can kind of introduce that concept. If you're familiar with live play shows like Dimension 20, Critical Role, you'll probably be familiar with the idea of these incremental fights. So you're kind of introducing lieutenants, minions, things like that in smaller fights as the players build up to a final boss fight. It's pretty good for story reasons. For one, you have these lieutenants and they're showing up and it shows that the villain has people under them. And if you make those, lieutenants and whatever strong, it does kind of add to the feeling that the boss has these powerful minions under them. How strong must they be? It kind of raises them up by kind of setting a new set of expectations by having these smaller minions down. It's cool for thematics too, just because obviously the villain's going to want to put roadblocks in your way, but it does kind of fall apart on the gameplay if you think about it, because a lot of the times how I've seen it get run is the players have a lot of time to rest in between these, kind of intermittent combats. They will have all their spell slots back, they'll have all their resources, they'll have had time to, buy new items. And so by the time they get to the final boss, they are as strong as they possibly can be, have all their resources. And so in terms of gameplay, those people kind of standing in the way didn't really do anything other than to slow down the cool fight that you had set up. So you walk up into the final boss room and you are just very strong. You have all your resources. Paladins will have all their smites, do like 1,000,000 damage per hit. And that's just not very satisfying for a boss. It doesn't really feel like they had actual obstacles, you know? If you rest, there was no consequence for that. So, if you do want your boss to have kind of like a final standoff with the players and be solo, which I don't generally recommend, but I understand like thematically it's cool to have like your single boss fight off all the players at once. You want to do something to drain their resources a little bit. The game was designed for you to go through a dungeon and have a hard time resting. So just make it so that as the players are getting closer to that final fight, maybe like the last set of fights are there to drain the players of their resources. Like, don't let them rest before they get to the final boss. Have them fight a smaller guy. Don't let them short rest. If they try to do like a long rest, they get interrupted. Just drain their resources so that when they're walking up, they don't have every single spell slot. They don't have every single potion. They don't have every single, class ability available to them. Just so it really does feel like those enemies made this fight more dangerous. Like, because a lot of the times we have all these minions, we have these lieutenants, and they don't make the final boss any more dangerous. And it kind of sucks, because it's kind of like they don't exist the second that fight's over and you, like, long rest or something. Just make it so that there's consequences for having done that fight. Maybe they could have gone around it. If you don't want your players to go through a gauntlet, that's totally understandable. I would recommend then to start adding in enemies in the middle of the fight. The lieutenants will join the fight, throw in adds or additional enemies into the middle of this combat. Enemies give your players something else to worry about. So, for example, a lich might have, like, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse or something, right? And then also a horde of undead. If you're a little worried about this kind of beginning to clog up combat, what I would recommend is any character that's like named per se, like a stronger lieutenant. They should have their own turn order along with the final boss, of course. And then like kind of the hordes, maybe they could just be top of the turn order. They all move at once. Just keep it as simple as possible. Do average damage, that kind of thing. And if you're too worried about rolling a bunch of dice, feel free to use my Google Sheets tools that I made. I think I put up in another video. I have it linked down in the description again. You just, roll a bunch. They're really easy to use. Having multiple enemies as well just adds in multiple threats, of course, to the players. But the main thing that I really like about having multiple enemies is it gives players uses for other abilities that they have. So, for example, if all your enemies are wailing on the boss and they're all kind of surrounded in one area, the spellcaster might not feel comfortable using a fireball. But if there's a horde of undead, they will go ahead and blast them. Heat metal might not work on a lich who has no metal on them, but it might work on the undead, or like one of the, say like a death knight or something that's wearing full like plate armor. That would work. The additional enemies can also be used as kind of like a unique mechanic for the fight. They shouldn't just be arbitrary just to kind of like reduce the your players like hit numbers. They should feel important still. So for example, if you don't kill the enemies in time, maybe someone gets a buff, or like everyone in the team kit takes some kind of like form of damage. Make it feel kind of like like a raid boss mechanic, for example. My best example I can think of this is probably the micro fight from Baldur's Gate 3. You start off, there's a bunch of these mages that you can kind of just fireball to death, and then once Micro actually comes out, he summons these like undead, I think they're undead, I don't remember, but who just kind of charge the center platform. Once they get close enough to the center platform, Micro will kill them and kind of gain a buff for himself. So the idea is that you want to kill them before they get to the boss. I never really had to do that in the game because Lae'zel is incredible, but kind of doing something like that with the players gets them to think a little bit outside of the box of let me just hit the boss until they go down. It's how do I prevent them from getting stronger and killing us. That just adds a little bit more of the variety and making sure that there are things that players will have to actively think about as the game is progressing. 2. Move. seriously, just move. Is it interesting just to have minis on a table going back and forth without moving? I'd like to say no, but if you think otherwise, sure, that's your own opinion, but I don't particularly like it. But generally speaking, combat is the most boring when the miniatures or your characters on your battle map are just sitting still. Look at this very short clip from K-Pop Demon Hunters. Not my favorite movie, but I do enjoy seeing them fight because they're kind of moving along the space. It kind of makes the space interact with them in a fun way. And it's a lot more fun than just, two characters kind of like going back and forth right in front of each other's faces, not moving, not kind of like stoically staring at each other. Not super fun. Or even just the series of punches from near the final fight of Sonic 3. Seeing, Shadow kind of like move Sonic across the map a little bit is interesting. It keeps the fight just kind of feeling a little bit more exciting because everything feels a little bit more interactable. The fight is not just everyone's frozen static, things are moving. So how do you do it? Very easily, give your boss the ability to move themselves very easily, or move players very easily, displace the players. The easiest thing that you could do is probably add a legendary action that allows your boss to move very easily. If they don't have one, just add one. If it's like a mage type, maybe it's more of a teleport function. If they are, a kind of melee fighter, maybe they're shoving the players out of the way and like charging forward. Something like that will just add a little bit to the dynamics of the fight, as people will have to constantly kind of readjust their position for the boss. Or even give them bonus action like movements, give them like a dash that they can do. Just make them take more dashes than you think they would need to, or make them move more than they would need to. If there's some kind of mage, say they're a warlock or something, Eldritch Blast, Repel, right? And let them do it multiple times, kind of break the limit on that. So they're pushing people 10 feet multiple times. Maybe if they can push people towards like ledges and things like that, to give the boss an edge that the players don't have, because again, they are one character. And then, or even like if they're, a knight character or like a brawler, they could have something akin to the crusher feat, right? Pushing people. And again, allow them to do it a little bit more often than a player would, because they should feel stronger. And then, or even that, mages, spells, vortex warp, like, what is it? Like Arms of Hadar, things like that. Things that move people closer to them, further from anything like that. And even beyond those options, just have your villain move. Let them take the opportunity attack. I think that you should be triggering opportunity attacks more often as a DM anyways. Give the players a chance to hit them. Usually your bosses have a pretty high AC, or like some way to not get hit, or get hit as hard anyways. Just let them get the hit from an opportunity attack. The reason being is that you can get rid of your players' reactions, and that's actually a really great thing for a villain. Just do that. Have them move, one, take the opportunity attack, and then it forces them to use their movement on their turn to get closer to your villain. I think that is just a more fun way to play. Also gets rid of silvery barbs and counterspells. Cool. Okay, and now that you have all this happening, the fight no longer feels like it's this kind of like static scene with two people just kind of like fighting each other. And now you're kind of imagining it as a bunch of characters moving out in a space all at once. Remember, these are happening in 6-second increments. It's happening fast, and they are just, rolling around, fighting each other, blasting each other as fast as they can, and they have to constantly readjust. And while you do it, make it flashy. Like when the enemy teleports away, it leaves like everyone feels kind of like this energy rippling through. Make a description. You're a DM, turn it into an RP moment still. 3. Take more actions. So obviously I already mentioned legendary actions, so use those. I think it's a pretty good system of allowing your enemy to have kind of a constant flow of extra abilities that they can use to give themselves a little bit of a chance to keep pace with the amount of players and other elements going on in a fight. Use them. It's a good system. But on top of having legendary actions, I also really like Matt Colville's villain actions. I know that they are intended to be kind of a replacement for legendary actions, but I like to use them both because remember, I have like 7 players, and anything to help my villains keep a little bit of extra pace while still being a little bit dramatic is something that I will very greatly appreciate. Essentially, how I like to think about villain actions is I imagine them as extra dramatic flair that a enemy can do once per turn. Villain actions can only be done once, and only one can be done per turn. The most common way that I see it done is kind of setting it up a per turn basis. An enemy will be able to do this on turn 1, turn 2, turn 3. That way each of these turns plays a little bit differently, or something dramatic happens and the players have to readjust how they think about the fight on the fly, making just the fight feel a little bit more dynamic. So this gives my villain the ability to, at a minimum, at least until they run out of villain actions, do 3 actions per like round, which does sound like a lot, but you have to consider that they're fighting 10 drugged up weirdos. For example, a villain could be using their legendary action to teleport away from all the players, as per the movement thing that I was talking about earlier. And let's say a legendary action would be able to activate all the turrets that are kind of like in their vicinity all at once, giving like a massive attack to like a bunch of the players. But they could only use it once, because let's say the turrets need to get recharged for whatever reason. Okay, on a side note, I also don't really like legendary resistance as an idea. I know that some people do adjustments to their legendary resistance so that, like, the boss takes damage if they use it. I still think it is very important to use legendary resistance so your boss doesn't just get paralyzed and stuck there for forever. But my solution to it is, because I'm adding so many actions, is making the legendary pool one pool. So there's no legendary resistance pool versus a legendary action pool. It's actually just one pool. What that means is your players could technically force the boss to use legendary reactions, therefore reducing the amount of actions they could take within that turn. Say if the boss has like a 3-point legendary action, but only a 3-point pool, and the players, hit him with like a, whole person or something, they might want to, spend some of those legendary like pull points to not be rendered ineffective. That way it feels like your players are at the very least reducing something that's an actual important resource. I think that is at least the solution that I've landed on currently. If there's something better, I always like suggestions, but that's what I'm at. 4, don't stand in the fire. So this one's a pretty quick one, and one that I think that many people can very inherently understand quickly. It's the idea of highlighting areas in which something bad is going to happen in a game. It is a little bit video gamey, but again, we are getting into like a combat sim on a tabletop. So yeah, play it a little bit like a game, So for example, if I'm talking about those turrets earlier, let's say they highlight the areas that they're going to be landing. Maybe it's, instead of it targeting a single player, it hits like a, like a 2x2 cube, or like the arena's falling apart and like parts of the floor are becoming lava, things like that. Just adds a little bit to the game. And if you want to make those things kind of quick, there are a few solutions that you would be able to do to make that happen. You could, of course, just cut out a few like 2x2 squares and place them out on the map manually as you're going, or very quickly, use a highlighter or something, draw out different areas. If you're playing digitally, this would be really easy. You just like have things that you set up to show like areas, like layers on whatever tabletop sim that you're using. Other than that, if you're playing in person, place down stuff, or absolutely crazy idea, have a projector, show where like the red areas are. That's the expensive option. You don't have to necessarily do that, but that is something that you could do, is use that as a way to like show, oh, these are different areas, and then be able to flip through like a random generated table of like where it would actually land. But that just like forces players again to be moving more often, which I think is always a good thing. And then if they can hit the enemy characters as well, I could add an element of having your players try to, move characters into dangerous zones. That way, it adds more things to think about, and more things to think about is fun as long as your players are quick on their feet. Okay, so at the end of the day, these are very easy, common things that people have already talked about, but I haven't said it in my own voice, so that's why I'm saying it. But it's essentially keep your keep your characters moving, keep your villains moving, make your villain do a lot of things, and make sure that your villain has useful allies as well. They should have lieutenants, have things that are slowing the players down in one way or another. It should be either before combat or during combat. And then just give your actual battle a little bit more like dynamics by having the arena change, or have like red zones where it's dangerous, things of that nature. And I would say that's a significantly better and more interesting fight. Essentially, how I like to imagine every single fight is just imagine, honestly, just like imagine like an animated show where a lot of characters are fighting, say like Vox Machina, the animated show. I'm not like the biggest Critical Role person, so I haven't actually seen those fights in game yet, but just imagine what that fight looks like. Characters are moving around way more than, they might be doing in a tabletop setting. They are doing all those things. Make a fight feel like it could be an animated show. That's kind of like my philosophy on a lot of it. Just like make it feel like you could record it and this scene could be real. But anyways, that's it. I just wanted to kind of leave my 2 cents on that, on how to make villains feel a little bit more oomphy. Yes, there are some mechanical things, but a lot of this is just like, hey, the character can do more actions, they will feel more powerful. Of course, you don't want your paladin to feel weak, right? So, and you don't want to explode your villains. So you want to be able to use like smaller actions on your weaker characters and the bigger actions on some of the strong characters. Kind of just adds to the vibes that everyone's getting, that, oh, this is a threat that kind of affects all of us, but it's not just outright unfair, I think. Okay, that's everything. Thank you so much for watching.